So, as something of a thought exercise, I decided to think about the kinds of changes I would make to D&D 5e if I were to try and make it something that I actually wanted to play uh, as a day-to-day game. The first thing I would definitely want to change is save or suck effects. So the first two rules here are both getting rid of kind of feels bad save or suck effects. So incapacitated as it currently is, it means you can't use your reaction, action, movement, or bonus action. Uh, in most places where you get incapacitated right now, I've replaced it with dazed, which lets you choose one of those things. So when you get stunned by the mind flayer, you can kind of force yourself to take one shot at the enemy, but you can't necessarily get your whole turn, right? And similarly, uh, legendary resistances are kind of a save or suck, right? Where I'm a caster, I cast my big spell on the enemy, and it just uses its legendary resistance, and nothing happens until round 4 of the combat, when the combat's basically over. So I replaced that with a legendary creature may expend one of its legendary resistances at the start of its turn as a bonus action to end any ongoing effect. So you cast Hold Person. You actually do hold that creature, and until its turn, your whole party gets to beat up on it. But then at the start of its turn, it's going to bonus action end that effect on itself and still get to take its action and its movement as usual. So it doesn't just automatically win you the fight, but at the same time, it's still high impact. And when it does so, it takes damage equal to its own CR. So that's also nice because at least, in exchange for casting a big spell effect on it, you got a little damage in, right? So that should hopefully make it be less feels bad when it just saves versus your big spell. And it should encourage spellcasters to be more willing to expend their spells early on in the fight. So then, grappling and shoving, I move them back to opposed checks, not saving throws. I just prefer that personally. Controlled area, all squares directly adjacent to a hostile creature wielding a melee weapon or with natural weapons are treated as difficult terrain. So basically, if you are a fighter standing in the way of an enemy, he shouldn't be able to just sort of skirt around you for free. You're kind of wrestling with him, slowing him down, jostling him. He's having to carefully move around you. He moves through your occupied territory or your controlled territory at half speed. And I think that that's cool. And it gives melee combatants a bit of a control power, right? So now, by standing in melee with an enemy, you're not only threatening them with your weapon, you're also limiting their ability to move away and to move to your allies, which I think is nice. It gives a little bit of control back to the marshals. Opportunity attacks do not require your reaction. However, sneak attack may only be applied once per round outside of your turn. Obviously, that second rule is a caveat to prevent off-turn sneak attack hitting 3 or 4 times. But I do think, opportunity attacks proccing more than once is something that's true in Draw Steel, and I just think it's good game design. It speeds up fights, it makes them more dynamic and active, and it's a buff for marshals, which is, half this document is a buff for marshals. Free strike. You may make an unarmed attack as a bonus action. Now, this basically has always been weird to me that you can, if you're wielding a knife in one hand and a knife in the other hand, you can stab with your offhand. But if you don't have a knife in that hand, then that hand is now useless. It can't do anything. Why can't you just shove an enemy or grab them, pull them towards you, knock them to the ground, etc.? Now, you may think this is too powerful because shoving does let you knock enemies prone or push them back. However, that effect is only on if you have a free hand anyway. So you have to have a free hand in order for this free strike to let you push an enemy. But if you just want to be able to, punch a guy in the face and do 3 points of damage, or more likely to shove an enemy off of a wall or something, you can do that. And it feels a little like Baldur's Gate 3, where you get to push as a bonus action. So I enjoy that. Shove. When you shove a creature, they move a number of squares equal to your strength modifier, minimum 1. So, again, if you're a strong character, you can push an enemy 5 squares back, right? That would be amazing. Monks may shove equal to their dex modifier. I got to take care of my monks. I love my monks. Colliding, or when you're shoved or force moved and you collide with a creature or object, you and the creature or object both take damage equal to 1d6 bludgeoning per remaining square of movement. So if I shove you 4 squares into a wall, you take 4 squares worth of shove damage for slamming into that wall. And I think that's cool. That's another thing from Draw Steel. So falling damage uses d12s instead of d6s. I just think falls should be more impactful, and so I'm in favor of giving them bigger damage. The null result, if you deal no damage and otherwise do not hinder an enemy or help an ally on your turn via missing every attack or a target saving against your spell, you may grant yourself or an ally a heroic inspiration. Draw Steel is all about removing the null result from the game. I could not go back to D&D and have a person spend 45 minutes waiting for their turn, miss all their attacks, and say, well, I pass, having done nothing. So I've already added some things that should make the null result basically never happen anyway, like the bonus action shove is something that prevents a null result from ever occurring. But this is just another way to make it a little nicer on our mages and our warriors who miss all their attacks. Ranges. This is probably a controversial one, but I halved all the ranges of weapons. Basically, I put the maximum range of a weapon to 120 feet, and the first range increment to 60 feet. So, unless it had less to begin with. So, your thrown dagger is not suddenly getting a range increase, but it means that there's no longer like a 380 range crossbow. That amount of range is not conducive to how we use battle maps in the game, and it just creates problems. I don't think it actually helps anybody. I did also implement this for spells, so spells have a maximum range of 60 feet. I think it's wild that you can cast Fireball from 120 feet away and basically be in a different zip code from the rest of the battle and just be hucking in spells and never get punished and never take damage. I kind of want to disincentivize being at extreme range and hiding at extreme range, and this is just another way to do that. Spells, so general changes. No area of effect spell can damage a target more than once per round. This just gets rid of stupid junk like dragging people in and out of area of effect spells to get them to take the damage multiple times. I think that stuff is silly and bad for the game, so no, I deny it. When under the effect of a spell that requires a save on each of your turns, you gain a bonus to your saving throw equal to double the number of turns you've been under the effect. So, it's the end of your first turn, somebody casts Hold Person on you, you've been under the effect for 1 turn, so you gain a +2 bonus to your saving throw. So this just means that you're not likely to end up stuck in a save or suck spell for the entirety of the game, right? Which is nice. Maybe not as necessary with Dazed. I'll have to play it a little bit to see how it feels, but yeah, I just thought it would be nice to give people, because there are times where you can get in a saving throw of a spell and you just can't save out. Like the save DC is too high, your stat modifier in that skill is too low, you're just stuck there forever. And I don't like that. I think that sucks. Concentrating on a spell requires you to skip your movement, bonus action, or action each turn. So hang on. So I'll probably add a caveat to this that it doesn't count for the first turn that you have this ability, but the point of this is that concentrating is the most powerful thing you can do in Dungeons & Dragons right now. A summon spell has a movement, an HP bar, and multiple attacks per round. It is basically a whole new character you're introducing to the battle, and it costs absolutely none of your action economy on subsequent turns to keep that thing going. Marshals have nothing like that they can do in the game, and the damage that summon spells do is pretty high. So I think that concentration spells are basically the most powerful thing you can do in D&D, and so I want to rein them in a little bit. So having to give up your bonus action each turn, having to give up your main action if you really want to, or even just your movement, right? Just like I stand still, but I keep my concentration, is a little bit of a consequence that like makes you have to make more complicated decisions, right? Shield. If you're wearing armor or a shield, you cannot benefit from the effects of the shield spell. Shield is a good spell and necessary for the game when it is used by wizards and sorcerers who have, mage armor on, like a 13 armor class plus their decks of like maybe 1 or 2. So total of 14 or 15 AC. And then they use shield to temporarily get to 20 to resist a bunch of attacks. But they can still be hit. Shield becomes degenerate when you combine it with a static armor class by, multi-classing into Artificer, getting some armor efficiencies that way, or you're a cleric and you take a feat to get the shield spell, and suddenly you have a static AC of 20, you can use shield spell to get up to 25. Now, even with a crit, enemies cannot hit you until you're into the mid to high levels, and by then you've hopefully got some +1 armor, +1 shield, something like that, and you can just keep getting that AC higher and higher and never have to worry about getting hit for the rest of the game. It's ridiculous. It's not good for the game. I can't believe they didn't fix this in 5.5. Hypnotic pattern. Each creature saves at the end of their turn. It's wild that this isn't in the original spell. Wall of Force, Force Cage. The spells have an AC of 15 plus the level of the spell slot used to cast the spell. And they have an HP of 15 per level of the spell slot used to cast the spell. So when you cast the spell at 5th level, Wall of Force, it has HP of, I think, like 75. I think that's fine. 75 HP, and it's cast at 5th level, so it's 20 AC. I think that is a sturdy little blocking wall that can hold back an enemy for a couple turns. But at the same time, it's not something that just ends the combat and auto-wins the encounter, which I think is ridiculous. Swift Quiver does not require concentration. It's wild that it does. Hail of Thorns deals 2d10 damage. It's kind of useless as it currently exists. Conjure Barrage deals 8d8 damage. This is a lot of damage. I mean, this is more than Fireball for a 3rd level spell. However, this is a ranger-specific spell. It is not given out to other classes that can get it earlier. And when you have things like the Bard's, lore Bard's ability to get spells from other classes, they specify now that it has to be from certain class lists, and Ranger is not one of those. So, by the time the Ranger gets this 3rd level ability, they are a half caster, so it's like, the Wizard has been casting Fireball for 5, 6, 7 levels, right? And you're just now getting this way later in your career, so it should be a big, punchy, powerful payoff for having invested this far into Ranger. And so I think it's perfectly fine for it to be a damage outlier at its level. If I, get in play and it's a little overtuned, I might dial it back a bit, but I think starting here and letting it be amazing and then dialing it back until it's just, like, good, is a great way to make the Ranger feel like a half-caster and not just a martial with a couple of crappy spells. Weapon Mastery. Topple can only affect a large or smaller creature, so no more toppling dragons or other, like giants, things like that make no sense for you to be able to just, like, whack their foot and they fall over. However, or creatures one size category larger than you, whichever is larger. So if you have, like, if you're a medium creature with enlarge reduce cast on you, so you're like large size, and then you've drank a potion of growth, and so you're a huge size, I want you to be able to wrestle with a Tarask or whatever. So, I'm going to allow you to topple in that condition. And then finally, if the creature saves, their movement speed is reduced by half on their next turn, but you can only use this weapon mastery once per turn. So, if you try to topple and you fail, their movement speed is reduced to half. But you can only topple once per turn. This means that we're no longer rolling topple in every single attack against an enemy until eventually we knock them prone, which is kind of an annoying gameplay pattern. But at the same time, this is the only weapon mastery with a saving throw, so there should be some reward for using it. So reducing an enemy's movement speed by half as a guaranteed minimum of this effect is awesome, right? So I can topple an enemy, knock them off balance so they're not able to move their full speed, for sure, and maybe knock them to the ground and get the advantage on my other attacks. So it's still worth doing, but it's not quite as strong as it is now, which is where it's kind of like... And also it's just kind of annoying, because it... You know, if a fighter has 4 attacks per turn and the action surge, they get 8 chances to try and topple an enemy. They are basically guaranteed to eventually topple that enemy. And I don't think the ability is balanced around that. You know, just granting advantage to everybody who hits that guy until your next turn. It's a very strong power, and it should have some restrictions to it. Martial boons. So these are my changes to classes. Fighter, rogue, monk, and barbarian may pick an additional origin feat of their choice at level 2, but multi-classing into any of these classes does not grant this benefit. So you can't just dip into these classes to get an extra origin feat. However, I think martials could really benefit from having more in and out of combat options, and origin feats are a great way to get those. You can pick up Magic Initiate to get a couple of like low-level spells and cantrips to have some fun out-of-combat utility, or you can pick up a cool origin feat like Alert and Tough to like really make your martial stand out as like a really exciting member of the combat. And then finally, these classes may pick an additional feat of any kind at level 10. Again, I'm hopeful that this means that there's less pressure on the feat economy, so you have the room to pick stuff that's fun, not just the stuff that's optimal for your build, right? I want you to be able to pick enough feat. I want you to have enough feats by level 10 that you're starting to pick, like, interesting stuff, not just like, oh, this one's required for my build, this one's required for my build. Okay, I'm at level 12 now before I finally get a feat that's fun to take. So hopefully this frees you up to have more fun feats as well. Extra attack patch, I've had this in my homebrew document for years. Basically, if you gain the extra attack feature from a class and you already have it, you can pick a fighting style or weapon mastery. So, you know, there's nothing worse than being like 5 levels into fighter and then 5 levels into barbarian, and you get the extra attack feature, which does nothing. So this lets you get a fighting style or a weapon mastery. It's a consolation prize for having dipped into 2 martial classes so far. Barbarian, I added a defensive feature. Barbarians are actually kind of like, we think of barbarians as defensively monsters, right? Like they are taking half damage, they have the biggest hit die, but realistically, they are also granting enemies advantage on attacks, and their unarmored AC is not really that good. Like, if you're realistically, most of the time you're going to have like a +2 index, maybe, and a +3 in con, maybe. It might more realistically be like a +1 index and a +2 in con. And at that point, you're looking at like a 13 to 14 AC, like a 13 to 15 at best. Really not going to have that great of an armor class until very, very late in the game. And you are using reckless attack, which means enemies are getting to hit you at advantage. And Barbarian's got a stealth nerf in the way that monsters are designed in 5.5, which is that monsters hit with different kinds of damage types now. They hit with psychic and radiant and necrotic and poison and all these other kinds of damage types that you don't resist. And so I've had barbarians just melting in my 5.5 campaigns, where they were never like that in 5e. So, as a patch to that, I wanted to give them a defensive option, but just giving them a little more AC was boring, and giving them a feature that someone else has was also boring. I was heavily inspired by the monk, and the way that their deflect attacks lets them have a totally unique way of being the best, defensive in their class. So my version of that for Barbarian is at level 2, as a reaction to taking damage, a Barbarian may expend 1 of their Barbarian hit dice and add their con modifier, and then add the total as temporary HP before taking the damage. So, an enemy comes up to hit you, you're almost down. You roll one of your d12s, you get 4 on it, plus your con is 3, so you have 7 temp HP to help soak some of that damage. It's a feature that will help you to just weather some of the damage that's coming in at you each round. And because attacks of opportunity don't take your reaction in these rules, you're not as reluctant to use a feature like this. You feel a little better about using a feature like this. And yeah, I just think it's a nice, simple defensive buff for barbarians. It's not going to give them a ton of extra defense, because they're already pretty hardy at a d12 hit die and resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. And this also has a resource cost because it uses up one of their hit dice. So it's not free, but it is just a little something extra to help them be defensively on par with everybody else. Monk, I gave them a utility power because monks really don't have any out of combat utility abilities, just like fun non combat stuff. So at level 2, you may expend 1 focus point to allow a creature within 5 feet of you to gain any special senses you possess, to share a language you know, or to gain a movement speed equal to your movement speed. This effect lasts for 1 minute. So, if you have blind sight from your ancestry or you have dark vision from your ancestry, you spend a key, touch a friend, you give them dark vision, right? It's sort of like the dark vision spell that a spellcaster can get access to. Alternatively, you can touch your rogue friend and give them a movement speed of 45 feet like you have. And now they can dash into melee. Or your barbarian, right? He's like way in the... Or like your fighter who's like out of position. You touch them, you give them your 45 feet movement speed. They dash into melee. I think this is a cool little ability that'll give them some fun roleplay moments and also give them some good combat utility. And just be a nice little boon to help the monk just be more well-rounded. Rogue, at 5, 10, and 15, you gain 1d6 additional sneak attack damage. A lot of people are saying that Rogue doesn't scale well. I agree with that, and especially because a lot of their new features require them to spend sneak attack dice to activate those abilities. And their sneak attack dice pool is already not doing that much for them. So I think 3 extra die of sneak attack by level 20 is going to be keep them competitive in the damage game, and it's going to make it much less painful to spend those sneak attack dice to activate their new cunning abilities a little more often. Additionally, I give rogues a level 2 fighting style from a smaller selection. So 2 weapon fighting, blind fighting, archery, unarmed fighting, or thrown weapon fighting. I just think that rogues especially could use a little bit of help in 5.5, so I gave them 2 buffs instead of 1. Ranger. At level 5, Hunter's Mark no longer requires concentration. I just think that this should have been in the game from the start. However, we don't want it to be at level 1 because we don't want Ranger to become the ultimate martial dip class. So by gating it behind level 5, we limit it a little bit in that regard. This does, however, require us to change a couple of their other features. And how do I do that? Well, at level 13, your Hunter's Mark now deals 2d8 damage. Instead of that ability that means that you can't lose concentration from damage, because it's no longer concentration at all, now your Hunter's Mark just deals 2d8 of dice. And then that makes the level 20 feature kind of irrelevant, so I just made it 3d10. Rangers could use the extra damage in the mid to late levels. So giving them these big buffs to Hunter's Mark and to their level 13 and level 20 feature, I think is going to help them be more relevant at high level. And then the final change is to the feat Musician. It is an origin feat that lets you give a heroic inspiration to your allies at every short and long rest. And it's based on your proficiency. I changed it to only give heroic inspiration after a long rest. As it currently is, it seems like basically everyone in your party always has an inspiration to either use or give to an ally whenever they need to reroll something, which ultimately means you just never see players fail rolls in 5.5. Like, they always have heroic inspiration. Somebody in the party has it and they'll share it with you when you need it, and it just gets a little annoying for me. It also kind of makes Musician sort of a must-have feat in every party in 5.5, and must-haves are bad for the game. So limiting it to once per long rest is going to bring it more in line with other origin feats. It's going to make it way more similar to Lucky as it currently exists, right? Lucky gives you 3 rerolls per day, but Musician gave you 3 per short rest at level 5. So this makes Lucky and Musician way more comparable. I think Musician is still actually better than Lucky just because of how flexible heroic inspiration is compared to the Lucky reroll. But at least they're comparable in this. I found this thought exercise really interesting, just like as a exploration of what I feel about 5.5, what I feel is lacking in 5.5, what I feel like could fix 5.5. Ultimately, when I look at this document in its totality, it's clear to me that the main thing I'm feeling is a frustration about the martial caster divide, which is a often talked about conversation. I don't really think people understand the martial caster divide. People talk about like damage, right? But I don't think damage is actually the problem in the martial caster divide. What is actually the problem in that divide is access to options, right? On a wizard's turn, they have a list of spells and they pick an option from that list and then they use it. That means they are being tactical. They are getting to make a choice every round about what they do and how they do it, and that is making the combat more interesting and more complex. Marshals don't really have choices every round. They can do their damage and that's it. But if we introduce stuff like a bonus action push ability, that giving you another option. If we make your just where you're standing difficult terrain, suddenly that turns your movement into a tactical choice, right? If we make opportunity attacks no longer cost your reaction, we give you more reactions that are actually useful, and they're no longer competing with your just doing damage to the enemy and ending the fight sooner. Which makes feats that like the one that gives you an armor class buff based on using your reaction when you take damage, makes that a lot more viable. And it also means that you're able to lock down an area with your presence, right? Again, you are now a control spell. You go up near a group of enemies, and if they move away from you, they provoke you multiple times. So each one's going to get hit. So now where you stand is way more important. So that encourages movement. Shoving encourages movement, right? You push an enemy into an effect that your ally has set down. By increasing the power of shoving, the distance of shoving, you are pushing allies into areas. And of course, a lot of these rules are from Draw Steel because Draw Steel is a really good game. And I think that it already has thought of a lot of these problems and solved them within itself. And that's part of why I love it so much. And so, one problem we couldn't solve, I kind of had to cop out with the null result ability, right? I wanted to add in never missing from Draw Steel because it's a great thing about Draw Steel. You never miss. It feels great to like always progress the battle, at least somewhat. But the reality is there's no way to implement never missing in D&D that doesn't leave somebody out in the cold, right? So if you just have fighters always deal damage equal to their damage modifier, well, now the Gray's weapon mastery doesn't work anymore. So now you've got to buff the Gray's weapon mastery. But how do you buff that in a way that's not just strictly better than regular attacking, right? So you've got to figure out how to buff Gray's without messing up the damage of normal attacks. And then while you're figuring that out, what about spell attacks, right? Do we also want those to never miss? Do we want those to have a Graze effect? And then what about save or suck spells, right? Spells where if you succeed, it's amazingly powerful, but if you don't, you did nothing on your turn. How do you reward those, right? And so it becomes this really complicated interwoven nest of little problems, and I ultimately kind of copped out with the null result resolution here. Additionally, in Draw Steel, ranges are much smaller than in D&D, and that's by design. That forces fights to be closer and tighter and more intense, whereas in D&D, ranged characters are basically immortal. I'm going to talk about the new book that's coming out with Air later in the week. We've already been ranting and raving about some of the features that they've included. But one of the options in that book is a mobility option for spellcasters that lets them basically kite enemies forever. And it's wild that they're offering that to spellcasters who definitely didn't need the help. Fireball at 120 feet means you're in a different zip code from the rest of the battle. An enemy has to spend multiple turns dashing. Dashing is the worst thing you can do in D&D because it consumes your whole action. So instead of ever getting to hit an enemy, you are now just moving. And all that time that you're moving towards the spellcaster, they are putting control effects down on you. They're putting control effects down on your allies. Your marshals are doing damage to that target. The spellcaster is doing damage to that target. And you're getting whittled down so that by the time you actually end up in melee, you're basically already dead. So, it's wild that the range of spells is as long as it is, as it currently stands, because it basically just means that certain members of the party are never taking damage, which then puts all of that damage onto other members of the party. So you have, the poor fighter who's actually fighting in melee with his shield and sword, tanking all of this punishment, taking 4 player characters worth of damage because 3 of them are at range and he's the only one that the enemies can actually reach. And these sorts of things just like compound on each other to create a really complicated nested doll of issues and problems that these rules can help alleviate, but cannot really solve. And all of these rules, for as much as I think like the game would be, for me, more fun if run in this way with these rules, all of these rules could be implemented, and that still wouldn't make D&D a tactical game. Because when you get to the start of your turn as a fighter, you might have a few options, maybe, but if you're, two-handing a weapon or two-handing a longbow, you don't have a hand free for shoving or grappling, right? So that's not really an option for you, right? So it's all very tricky, and it's difficult. But I do think like doing the exercise was helpful for me. It helped me understand my problems with 5.5. It also kind of revealed to me how simple some of the fixes to this game could have been, which is something I was already well aware of, but it's nice to reiterate it every once in a while to remind myself that, this stuff is not set in stone. It's not written in the stars. It is a choice that people made. And when they release busted feats, that's a choice that people are making. And there may be all sorts of reasons why they're making those choices. But at the end of the day, it results in a game that is tactically uninteresting and mechanically unsatisfying. And these fixes can bandage that problem. But Jay's 5.5 will never fix 5e. That would require a full system redesign, and I don't have time for that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this thought exercise as much as I did. I really enjoyed thinking about all the little things in 5e that were problematic for me, and trying to come up with solutions that made sense, talking to my friends, getting their feedback, making revisions based on the stuff that they said. I'm curious to hear what you feel. I'll post the link to this in the description, so please feel free to click it, read it, and leave your feedback as well. Until next time, Jay, out!